Well, Jim, before you brought up the idea of Chief Jay Strongbow dancing around the ring, on a similar topic, this question was sent to CornyDriveThru@gmail.com from David Brennan in Blackpool, England. Of course, the Baron of Blackpool is Alan Blackstock, as we all know. I have a question.
Well, and that is the home base of formerly Lord Stephen Regal, now William Regal. Was it not?
Yeah, I believe so.
He's from Blackpool.
After Alan Blackstock, he's the man who made Blackpool famous. But I have a question which has always been on my mind.
Or maybe is he the man that made Blackstock famous?
Well, we will have to find out in the weeks ahead here on the show. But here's David Brennan's question. I have a question, which has always been on my mind. Hulking up. The first time I saw a pay-per-view was SummerSlam 90. I genuinely thought Hulk Hogan had been injured, perhaps mortally. Do you know of the first match in which Hulk did the hulking up routine? Did it evolve over time? And how do you think today's audience would react to a wrestler doing this? Imagine someone doing it in the UFC. And Jim, this question, you heard the contents of it, but other people have sent in questions regarding the origins of hulking up.
Well, I just realized nobody does do that anymore, do they? Because there's no babyface comeback, because there's really no heel heat, because nobody knows what each other are.
You need fans to care in order to pull down the strap.
Yes. Yes. And that's the thing, hulking up, Hulk Hogan did not invent. It's been called that because he was so obvious with it. With Lawler, it was dropping the strap. With
Jay Strongbow was the war dance.
Jay Strongbow was the war dance. With Bearcat Brown, he did a fucking dance. I mean, kids in Louisville, when they got in fights in school in the early 70s, they would start to do Bearcat Brown's fucking swinging his fists out from side to side and kicking his foot up in the air like he was going to make the comeback. Every babyface that was, not everyone, but every babyface that was a main event star, that was a top guy or had been used in a position or had some oomph to him, not just every single schlub, had a manner of starting his comeback, and some elevated it to an art form. And so it's old as the hills that the babyface would be getting the shit kicked out of him, and then finally something would happen where you would detect that he was not going to put up with this anymore, or that he was starting to bow up, as we used to bow up. That's the way you'd call it in I guess at least in Southern wrestling. Bow up at me, come back, whatever. But they would gradually start showing that they had life, they had fire, whether it be a look up to the people in the bleachers, or whether it would be the way they would twist their fucking body when they would get hit, and you would start to see some erection go back in their spine, or whatever. And Bob Armstrong did that. Every babyface down through the years that was over had some manner of doing that. And the key word is over, because the people had to give a shit. If the guy in the first match did it, they don't really care, right? If a guy that's not over does it, they don't give a fuck. But when you got in that position, when the people had paid to see you, and they're really invested in your selling, that's when, and I guess now a lot of people don't even understand what drop the strap meant. Lawler was the master. Hogan's, I always thought, was fucking, not only from a visual standpoint, it was phony, because he'd have everybody, including the biggest people in the world, just throwing shitty punches at his left shoulder while he walked away from him, shaking his fists. And that's shitty from a visual standpoint for the fans, but also from the guy working with you. Turn around, take a fucking punch so I can throw one that looks good, right? And then whether you sell it or not, that's immaterial, but just don't be walking away from me. Hogan's drove me crazy. But Lawler would be selling, and then suddenly he'd take a punch, boom, and instantly he'd turn his head and his back would shoot up straight, and he'd grab his chin and he'd start rubbing it, and he'd get a look on his face with his eyes crossed like it would be like a you motherfucker. a visual body language, you motherfucker, and the people would stop from the rumble that they had while he was getting beat on. They would pop, they'd roar, ooh, and then he'd take another shot, and he would recoil from that, but he would stand up even straighter and look back at the fucking guy with that look on his face. And the people would blow louder, and the heel might try one more time, boom, and pickle Lawler right in the face. And that time he wouldn't even sell it. He would then take that fucking right thumb, put it over the left shoulder strap, and drop the strap and put his hands up like he's ready to fight, and they would throw babies in the air. Before he had landed a punch, which they knew was coming, when the strap dropped, the people came to their fucking feet. And then he'd throw those punches, and every one he landed, they'd go, ooh, 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 ooh. And he'd make his big comeback. And every once in a while, with a Terry Funk, like we've talked about in the first 5-star match, he'd drop the strap, and he'd make a small comeback, but then he'd get stopped again because that's a big main event, and holy shit. And now, even the strap hasn't worked. And the people would be more invested into it. But that type of thing with a babyface starting to bow up under punishment, starting to show life to the people, whether he's doing a little dance or a little jig, or whether he's shaking his head, or whether he's walking away or rubbing his face or whatever the fuck, if he did it long enough and established it and made it his trademark, the people knew to get with it. And that sometimes was the biggest pop of the comeback. Not what he did to the heel, but the fact that the moment of the bow up is the fucking time where they come. And then he fucking makes the comeback, and they're with him. And once then they go into their finish, and the people are hooked for whatever they do. But you don't see that anymore because nobody gives that much of a fuck.
Who invented, there have been so many Native American wrestlers or pretend Native American wrestlers. Who invented the war dance as a no-sell towards the end of the match to make your big comeback?
Oh, good Lord. Who knows?
Was Don Eagle doing that?
I'm sure he was. Danny Little Bear was doing it in 1972. Probably even before Don Eagle. There was... I don't know if, there was a famous Indian wrestler in North Carolina named Chief Sawnook, who ended up being the promoter in Asheville and was a prominent person around town because there's a lot of legitimate Native American Indian tribes in North Carolina. And I don't know if he went all the way into the gimmick, but in a lot of cases where they had Indian wrestlers in places where there weren't a lot of real Indians, they'd go full-fledged into because it was colorful, a feathery headdress, and the tom-toms. And Chief Thundercloud brought his teenage son, Chewy, along, and he was the drummer boy. Chief Bobby Bold Eagle was an Italian named Bob Boyer, but he had a headdress that was 7 feet long. It was incredible. The best part of seeing Bobby Bold Eagle was watching him come to the ring with the drums and the colored feathers and the whole 9 yards. What an outfit. Then the match started. Holy shit. So but when you think about it, especially in the era of the 30s and 40s, cowboy movies, John Wayne, whatever, the common vision of an Indian in those days was somebody doing a war dance. So when the Indian was the babyface, of course he's going to do a war dance to make his comeback and fucking vanquish the heel. So even if they were Italian Indians or Mexican Indians, that was a big thing. Nick Goulas could take a Mexican wrestler and make him any nationality. It just depended on haircut and outfit. So whether they were real Indians, as some were, like Danny Little Bear, or whether they were Mexican Indians, like many were, or, some Italian Indians, they all did the same thing because it was the stereotype in those days of people that had watched cowboy movies on television.
So going back to Hulk Hogan and hulking up, he wrestled in Memphis in 79. He would do a shot
He was
against...
he was Lawler's tag team partner when he first came to Memphis. Yeah, he saw Lawler do that.
And then he came back and worked against Lawler in, I think, 81. And, of course, he went up to the World Wrestling Federation. Jay Strongbow's there. Then goes the AWA. I don't know who would have been doing something. I don't know what the Crusher did in his matches there, but...
see, for Crusher to make a hook up, that would have been intimidated that he sell, and Crusher never sold anything. But I mean, any babyface, yes.
But where do you think Hogan, if you had to guess, where do you think Hogan really got it from?
Well,
was Lawler doing it in 79?
God, yes. Lawler was doing it in the first time he switched babyface in 77. That's when he started doing it. So yeah, I'm sure he got it from Lawler because I doubt Hulk Hogan went up there in 1981 to the WWF and said, "Hey, show me some 10-year-old Jay Strongbow tapes. I want to steal some shit." But he'd been Lawler's tag team partner when they brought him in and introduced him in Memphis. So he saw that in the Coliseum or in the Gardens every week. Because this is not like that Lawler did not do this in 98 to 99% of the matches he ever had, and it never got old. The people I probably had their feelings hurt if it didn't happen. So he definitely saw it, yeah. But I mean, that's not unique in wrestling. He'd been watching Florida. Dusty. Remember when Dusty would sell like he'd get down on his knees and have you get the ice clamp, the lazy man's hold on him, right? The nerve hold on the shoulder muscle by the Spock pinch, and he'd be bleeding, and he'd put his arms out to his sides like he was on the cross, right? And he'd be kneeling there bleeding, and they're working on him, and he'd actually doing nothing, but then his wrists would start going. And his wrists would start circulating around a little bit. And then his arms would come up a little higher. And then all of a sudden, he'd give a double fucking finger and the place would blow. And then he'd fucking stand up and elbow and start making a fucking comeback. So Hogan could have seen it in Florida with Dusty. But he didn't think of it, Hulk Hogan. He didn't invent it. And it wasn't, like I said, it wasn't the best one.
The worst one I ever saw, even when I was a kid, I was like, this is ridiculous. He kicked out of everyone's finishers. Randy Savage hits it with the elbow drop at WrestleMania 5. 1, 2, he kicks out. He comes completely back, full energy.
Yeah.
And destroys Randy Savage, which in a lot of ways is very similar to their real-life relationship.
But, that's the thing. I didn't like Hogan's because it just didn't look good. It didn't look legitimate. But again, he was so over. We've talked about this. The more over you are, in some cases, the less good your shit has to look. Steve Austin stomping a mud hole. People couldn't see it because it was Steve Austin. But I just didn't like Hogan's, the poor sucker heel is standing there instead of at least having an opponent in front of you that's reacting to what you're doing like Lawler or like Dusty or like any of those guys. You're just having to follow him around the ring as he does his fucking hook up thing and punch him on his left shoulder because he won't turn around and take one. And I'm like, what the fuck? It was odd. It was odd.